a Miss World contestant who's a great speaker. But we started getting loads of complaints into my inbox from Chinese students at Durham University, and they started to say, why are you hosting this debate? Why have you invited Anastasia Lin? She is banned from China. You can't host this woman. You can't host her. You can't have her
Were they copy
in your
and paste
debate.
jobs?
They were all very, very similar. And we were sort of thinking, well, this is a union that is hundreds of years old, founded on the principles of free speech. We're not going to listen because some students are upset. And then it got to the point where I was pulled out of a tutorial that I was in, told to go to the union office and take a phone call from the Chinese embassy. And so I was taking a phone call here from diplomats in the Chinese embassy saying, you have to cancel this debate. You have to cancel this debate.
Crazy.
At one point, they even threatened the UK's trade terms with China. I think they thought that I was perhaps a representative of the British state. I wasn't. I was a student. But I ignored them and I said, no, we're going to host this debate. We hosted the debate. It was a massive success. We heard strong arguments on either side. And frankly...
Do you know what it's a good thing that you were there to make sure that your university and its union upheld the values of Britain and our liberal democracy.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be back after a little cheeky Easter week awake in Fuerteventura. Very nice it was too. But I have missed quite a lot because it was another busy week in Westminster, bringing another set of headaches for the government, from the honeytrap sexing affair to blue-on-blue attacks by Sir Alan Duncan. I was going to say Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. He wouldn't be responsible for blue-on-blue. Can Rishi Sunak bring the focus back on his 5-point plan? I'll be asking the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, for his thoughts on all the Tory turmoil. With the Cabinet currently split on Israel and former Prime Ministers David Cameron and Boris Johnson poles apart on the issue, I'll be asking former Foreign Minister Tobias Ellwood whether we should still be selling arms to Israel in light of the death this week of 3 British aid workers in Gaza. I'll also be speaking to Tony Blair's former political secretary John McTernan, as the latest poll suggests Labour is on course to win a mammoth 400 seats. Does he think we're going to witness a 1997-style landslide? Feminist, author and journalist Julie Bindel will be sharing her thoughts on the arrest threats facing J.K. Rowling over her gender-critical views in Scotland, and whether the government has lost its way with trans guidance in schools. And the author Alexander Larman will be speaking about his latest book, Power and Glory, which looks at Britain's most famous family, the Royals, starting with the Duke of Windsor's wartime treachery and ending with the coronation of Elizabeth II. It's going to be a full-on 90 minutes this morning, so you won't want to go anywhere. Right, let's get stuck into the Sunday papers, and I'm delighted to be joined by my Telegraph colleague, the columnist and sketch writer Madeline Grant this morning. Madeline, lovely to see you.
Thank you for
coming in. There's quite a lot to go at, actually. Again, we've got reports on the front of the Sunday Telegraph. This is James Heapy's written an opinion piece for the newspaper, basically saying that he thinks the UK is failing to prepare for war. And he's said that Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary, tried to initiate an exercise where government departments would go down and use the bunkers that would be prepared for them in the eventuality of war. And unfortunately, the government didn't really go with it, and it was scaled down, and only defence ministers ended up kind of trying out this exercise of how it might work to be working in a bunker. What does this say in general about how we're treating the threats against us from Russia, from China and beyond?
This is nuts, isn't it? I mean, you think that the whole point of this exercise, the way I've understood it, is that if you're putting the country on a war footing, that will necessarily involve buy-in from every single government department in all sorts of areas. And it seems like only the specific defence brief seems to understand the urgency of all this.
Yes.
And, of course, I just think that, we've got, I think, a compound failure of successive governments failing in their core duty, which is, to defend the realm against external threat. If you don't have that, then you have literally nothing else.
Yes.
And I think we're reaping what we've sown, or rather we've failed to sow for a very long time. Was
it a mistake, do you think, by Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak not to have upped defence spending in the last budget?
Yes, I think absolutely was. I mean, as I say, I think that's the single most important priority, and without that, you have nothing else. And I think, for example, the way that we've seen in the fallout from the Russia-Ukraine war, we found that by failing to take a long-term view of things like energy, for example, it created massive economic effects, impacted people in their pockets, inflation spiraled. And I think if you don't take that long-term view of that, you will find that in all sorts of other areas, basic functions break down. And it's certainly upset a great deal of Conservatives. Lots of Conservative MPs said privately that they were very disappointed that that wasn't front and centre of the budget.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? And we've got Liz Truss coming out with her book imminently, 10 Years to Save the West. We've got the US elections looming. We've obviously got an election in this country which the polls are suggesting is only going in one direction. I wonder what you make of the idea of a Trump resurgence and whether, weirdly, that might settle things down a bit.
Maybe. I mean, the thing about Donald Trump is that no one knew what he was going to do next. Do you remember when he just took out the leaders of the IRGC, just like that? Iran promised that there would be retaliation, but there wasn't really. And in a way, I think that attitude towards foreign affairs can work quite well if you're dealing with a part of the world where I think people respond better to brute force than anything else. And certainly the impact that the kind of general aura that Joe Biden has been exuding is one of weakness. I don't think that has helped at all. Well, but equally, I think Donald Trump might well sell out Ukraine.
Yes, and that's
sell them down the river.
Too.
So it's not a good choice that awaits the British people, the American people, and of course,
the British
and the world,
association,
because you know what America does has an impact on all of us.
You're talking about weak leadership when it comes to Biden or Israel. What do you make of the Foreign Secretary's leadership on this issue? Because obviously we've had this talk of us banning arms sale to Israel. David Cameron hasn't really sort of responded fully to that. He's, as Boris Johnson accused him, actually, in the week of sort of showing a strange amount of purdah on the issue, not really commenting either way. I feel David Cameron's written this op-ed in the Sunday Times today. We have humanitarian laws. Israel must abide by them. I mean, he's playing a good game of sort of October the 7th bingo in this piece where he's being all things to all men. Is he being strident enough in support of Israel, or does he have a point? At the moment, Netanyahu seems to be acting disproportionately. 3 British aid workers have been killed this week.
Well, of course, that the overall... Many people had the impression that although Israel does take steps to minimise civilian casualties, that there was a real... There was a lack of concern in some quarters for collateral damage, for sure. And, of course, this week's tragic and catastrophic error involving the deaths of 3 British nationals, I mean, that has very much played into that stereotype. Israel has not always made her an easy country for her friends to defend.
Yeah.
And I don't buy this idea that you have to be uncritically supportive of everything that goes on in order to be a decent ally. Sometimes you actually have to tell your ally areas where, you know, you think that their actions are working against them. I mean,
you need to be a critical friend at times, right?
True, and Israel needs friends. It needs the support of the international community. And, of course, there are so many people within Israel who have been highly critical of Netanyahu's management of this war. So it's not as if Israel doesn't have its own internal critics as well.
No, I mean, we heard criticism this morning, didn't we, from the family of one of the hostage victims, blaming Netanyahu, basically. I mean, I think for the original attack on October the 7th, questions are being asked about why Bibi didn't see this coming, but also the handling subsequently. Really interesting story in the Sunday Telegraph about the British response to this. Only 1 in 4 British Muslims believes Hamas committed murder and rape. What else has that survey discovered?
It's shocking. OK, so this survey was carried out by the polling organisation JL Partners for the Henry Jackson Society, the think tank. And they found that about half of British Muslims said that they sympathise with Hamas. And what I found most interesting, actually, is that amongst younger generations, younger, more educated people are more likely to believe conspiracy theories, to believe that Hamas was not guilty of committing murder and rape and all of this stuff. So it doesn't bode well for, I guess, the future of integration. The idea ought to be that the more educated you are, the more sort of well you have done in British society, the less you would buy into these. But the exact opposite is true. It's highly depressing, and I hope that we can be brave enough to have the necessary conversation around these findings.
Yeah,
because I mean,
it's hard to even talk about these findings because one obviously doesn't want to be suggesting that all Muslims are supportive of Hamas, or indeed the people on the marches are, by definition, because they're going on the pro-Palestinian marches supportive of Hamas. There are many, many Muslims that condemn Hamas and everything they've done. Funnily enough, there are many Muslims in Gaza itself that condemn Hamas and everything they've done. But what's difficult with regard to that younger generation is, are we thinking that they are basically getting their ideas from social media, where a lot of the claims made on TikTok and beyond are completely unsubstantiated and actually fuelled by Hamas propaganda?
Yeah, I'm sure that must be a part of it. TikTok is extraordinary. I mean, I'm almost a bit too old to be this kind of TikTok generation, but the Gen Z, the generation below me, gets an overwhelming proportion of their news directly from TikTok. You know, people complain about the legacy media a lot, but what replaces it might very well be worse.
And that's why you get a situation on sort of campuses where people are chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, without actually knowing the implications of that for Jewish students, for instance. Let's have a look at Angela Rayner. Now, the Mail on Sunday will not give up on this story, which was originally featured in Lord Ashcroft's forthcoming book. They serialised it and got this line about this second home. And now the Mail on Sunday is basically saying that they have got evidence that she has lied and that she was living in the house with the husband, because they claim that she took photographs, which she posted on social media, saying things like, delighted to be home. And it was the husband's home, not the home that she's claiming was her main home. It's confusing, this. I suppose the bigger issue is she becoming a liability for Keir Starmer?
Well, you know what? I think that what this particular debacle really speaks to, I think, is a feeling of Labour feeling that they're absolutely unassailable, that they could ride out just about anything right now, because, you know, there's so much contempt for the Conservative Party at the moment. But I think it does not bode well that I think actually a lot of people would have some sympathy for this. The tax system is notoriously complicated. I mean, I employ an accountant just to help me do my tax return on the small amount of money I make above my other salary.
And it should be said that Rayner's saying, my tax affairs are completely in order. I had accountancy advice on this. I've got nothing to hide. I mean, she hasn't reacted to this morning's revelations, and maybe she will. But
but I think a lot of people would have had some sympathy, having, you know, dealt with HMRC and the difficulty of that. And if she'd just come and said, well, look, I've made a mistake, here's what's happened and I've now resolved the matter, I think it would have gone away. But
she's deflected a bit too much. They have
held this line for a long time, and I think probably it will go away, because we'll move on to something else. Labour will continue to ride it out, but it does tell you something about the attitude that they don't have to be accountable in the way that they have often demanded of other politicians.
Oh, yes, if this was a Tory scandal, we'd have Rayner all over it,
Of course we would. And Rayner has demanded that Jill Mortimer, the MP for Hartlepool, publish her tax return, and that was just an ordinary backbencher.
Yes,
you know,
so
the
more
idea
transparency. Although the Tories are missing a trick here, they've left it to the Mail on Sunday to fight this battle. Have they been aggressive enough in their questioning of Angela Rayner? Again, you know, this idea of them being a bit too polite when it comes to attacks.
Maybe they'd rather not defenestrate Angela Rayner. They might think that if she stays where she is, that she would be more of an asset to them. I don't know.
Well, they may think that people think that she's kind of, you know, a stalwart of the harder left. She claims she's more moderate, but maybe that's a good point. Maybe she's politically convenient to the Tories.
It didn't have to be this way. That would be the thing I would say.
And then we're looking at Tories run ragged. Do you see what we've done there with William Ragg's name? Because we've got our former colleague Harry York in the Sunday Times saying how he was a victim of this Westminster honey trapper. And I think we can both agree that there is... I mean, that's the worst journalist in Westminster to target, actually, because there's no way Harry York is falling for strange messages from strange women. He's, first of all, happily married, and second of all, a bit too canny for that kind of behaviour. But the Sunday Mirror's claiming that this sex sting scam, which is easy for me to say, has been going on for a year. So my question would be, Madeleine, and you're a sketch writer, so you see these MPs up close and personal in the chamber
Not that personal.
Not that personally, to be fair. But should these MPs be on dating apps? Well, they're exposing themselves. This happened because he was on Grindr and got contacted by somebody on there. He's then given up these personal telephone numbers. Should they be on dating apps, first of all? And what should happen to William Ragg? Because we know that he's still vice-chairman of the 1922 committee, which looks after backbench Tories.
I'm not sure that is tenable for them. And I think it's pretty extraordinary that Jeremy Hunt not only defended him the other day, but said that he'd made a courageous apology.
Yeah, what was that from the Chancellor? I didn't get that defence. I thought it was odd.
That was crazy, because he made a foolish mistake. even if you think that he should stay in his job, at least acknowledge that what he did was incredibly stupid and potentially put other MPs, you know, giving out the phone numbers of other MPs. That's an idiotic thing to do.
Totally idiotic and risky, really risky.
But they haven't just been defending, they've been sort of saying that it was almost applauding him for his behaviour. This is really odd.
Yes, he's been very honourable in owning up to being a complete fool, and therefore we must applaud his moronic behaviour.
To your point about the dating apps, I mean, I think that nowadays that's where people meet people, and MPs are entitled to a private life, and it's, you know, people don't approach each other in pubs as they used to. Things have changed. But I just think that if you're an MP, you would be doubly vigilant, wouldn't you? You would be thinking very carefully. I just think you're so vulnerable to scams and people taking photographs that you don't want to be using and all the rest of it. There are some rotters out there.
This one will continue to run, I think,
yes,
Madeleine, is the conclusion. Thank you very much, Madeleine Grant, for joining me this morning. Lovely to see you. Well, coming up next, the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, will be joining me. What does he make of the Tory honeypot scandal? And should serving MPs be banned from going on dating apps? Stay tuned for that.
Tubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
You think this country needs new gas power stations. Apparently, this will all be about trying to get some form of energy security. Rishi Sunak has upset people today with this suggestion, people saying that actually this would do more damage to climate change than it would do good. Where are you on it, Richard?
I'll tell you exactly where we need a lot more gas power stations and nuclear power stations, because quite often the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Last week, we imported 16% of all our electricity because we haven't got enough capacity in the UK, and we're now totally over-reliant on renewables.
The part of the problem is the lack of storage capacity, which the government has finally got round to addressing. I think this as backup is actually quite a sensible idea. But they are not doing anything, as far as I can tell. At the moment, it will be retrofitted to have storage capability, which seems to be utterly bonkers. I mean, anyone who's got solar panels, you know very well you're storing up energy. So it's about storage as much as production. They could have gone, 20 years ago, we could have had nuclear power. We could have done more. We haven't looked far enough ahead in the future, and we are in grave danger of making the same mistake. I mean, the other side of this is, what is the difference going to be? Blackouts are, they're irritating and... Irritating?
It'd be disastrous. It would destroy our economy.
Well, they would be now, but, some of us remember 3-day weeks and things like that. And in fact, I grew up thinking that everybody had, at least a couple of days a week when they had to eat off a Primus stove and things.
This is, again, I don't want to harp on, but this is one of the problems in the politics in our country, isn't it? So many politicians, they just think in election cycles.
Absolutely.
They just think, what can I do and say to get my own backside re-elected at the next general election? They're not always looking ahead at, actually, politics aside, what is genuinely the best thing for this country. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Tubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by former chair of the Defence Select Committee and former Foreign Minister Tobias Ellwood, the Tory MP for Bournemouth East. Tobias, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning.
I wonder if you saw James Heapy's opinion piece in the Sunday Telegraph this morning, where he basically asserts that the UK is failing to prepare for war. He talks about that exercise that Ben Wallace wanted to carry out, where government departments work from their bunkers, just obviously to acclimatise themselves to a worst-case scenario. I mean, do you agree with this premise that we are failing to prepare for war, Tobias?
He raises a very important issue. A lot of respect for James Heappey, one of our best armed forces ministers for a while. We were in the same regiment together, a lot of experience there. So we should listen carefully to what he says. Our world is certainly getting more dangerous, not less. We've entered a very dark chapter indeed. We see the world splintering into two competing spheres of influence, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, pursuing a very different interpretation of our world order. And as we see, you've just been discussing the Middle East, you've got Ukraine as well, Africa too. The ability for the West to deal with individual conflicts is being tested. Indeed, our appetite is as well. We are going to face war of some form. We're not at peace now. There are different forms of warfare taking part, and we need to prepare. That is his message. And it isn't just the MOD and the FCO and Whitehall. It's actually the entire nation as well, to get over the fact that we've had 3 decades of relative peace, and we've got some very difficult years ahead. There is a 1937 feel to our world now. We need to wake up for that, and that includes greater investment in defence.
If there's I mean, I know what you're saying about defence spending because you've argued that before on this show, that defence spending should have gone up in the budget. So that was an error by Jeremy Hunt, do you think?
No, I heard that and listened carefully to what Madeline you were talking about. Absolutely agree it's got to move to 3%. But I know this, and James will probably agree with this, if you throw 3% at the military now, they will spend it in all sorts of curious ways, which won't necessarily align to what the threats are coming over the hill. The Army will want more tanks, more personnel. The Navy will want more ships, and obviously the RAF will want more planes. But we're being attacked in very different ways. So the first thing you do is to take stock of the types of threats that we're going to have to deal with, which can be very different from the traditional Army, Air Force or Navy. Although, clearly, we're going to have to defend those too. The Red Sea is a great example. I think, again, you touched on this, as to how the symbiotic relationship between our economy and our security is absolutely ever more critical than it's ever been before. If we don't defend international waters, for example, that impacts on our economy. And if it impacts on our economy, it impacts on the Treasury, and that impacts on every single department, not just the MOD. That's why we first need to have a defence review before we throw money at the MOD or our security in general.
OK. I mean, I know you've also argued in the past for more tanks, more personnel on the ground. Isn't there that claim that the armed forces are now the smallest they've been since the Napoleonic Wars? Let's just move on to Israel, because obviously you mentioned the Middle East there, Tobias, and I know you were once Middle East Minister for the Foreign Office. David Cameron's stance on this stopping, or the suggestion that we stop arms sale to Israel, it's been a little bit ambivalent, hasn't it? I mean, it's difficult to disagree with Boris Johnson when he says that ending such help to Israel would be, quotes, willing the military defeat of Israel and the victory of Hamas.
I think that's a bit sensationalist. Boris Johnson called it absolutely right on Ukraine. But to make this so binary, to say that if we were to somehow freeze arms sales for a specific reason, that somehow we're siding with the other side, that is completely wrong. I absolutely
Should we stop arms sales to Israel? Yes or no?
Well, no, it's not as binary as that. If Israel is seen to breach international law, we have no choice but to honour international law and therefore freeze arms sales. The question is, for Boris as well, and this is where I'd agree with Boris, is if you're simply doing it because you want to alter Israel's behaviour, then that is the wrong call of action. I absolutely support Israel's right to prosecute and to go after Hamas after what they did. But I also disagree with Israel's military response, which seems to be without clarity of what its strategy is. What's the governance structure that it's working towards? What is going to be the post-security environment that it's building? What we're seeing is actually in information, we're seeing this conflict spread beyond the Middle East because of what's going on, because of what Israel is doing. That is why David Cameron is saying there needs to be conditions on what's going on. When famine starts to break out, when we start to have to lean on the Navy and the RAF to deliver aid into Israel, into Gaza, when Israel has got the Rafah crossing in the south and the Arab crossing, which is only just reopened, that is an absence of responsibility of an occupying force to the civilians that are caught up in this. That is the issue that David Cameron is trying to drive home.
I know, but Tobias, surely if we stop arms sale to Israel, and let's be honest, I think we only account for 1% of Israel's arms anyway, doesn't that send a very, very dangerous message to Hamas and our enemies? You've just talked about us being at great risk. If we pull the plug on arms sales to Israel, what message does that send to the terrorists, rapists and murderers of Hamas?
You're oversimplifying it, if I may, OK? As you say, it would be tokenistic almost, but ultimately we have to abide by the standards and values of which we go to war with. When those standards and values start to fall, and we then start to lose sight of why we're fighting ourselves. Now, the only reason why the Erez crossing in the north, this enormous crossing, now aid can get into Gaza, is because Britons were killed in the last few days because of the World Food Kitchen NGO, plus others too. But we're seeing 13,000 children have been killed. We're seeing starvation now taking place as well.
So can you clarify for me?
Israel. This is what we want Israel to now recognise, that as it pursues Hamas, as it tries to kill the very people and go after those who conducted those barbaric activities on the 7th of October,
Tobias,
that they need to do so obliging, honouring international rules of war.
Can we have some clarity, though? Do you think that arms sales to Israel should be stopped or not? I'm not clear on where you stand on this issue.
Because it's linked 100% to whether international law has been breached or not. If it has,
if it's
we
been
have
breached,
no choice.
If international law has been breached, we stop arms sales to Israel.
We abide by international laws, therefore we have no choice. That is the legal advice that the FCDO is now considering itself. Now, as I say, we've got pressure from the United States, you've got pressure from Britain as well to say what Israel is doing, its conduct in its persecution of this war is without clarity as to where this goes. It's being compounded. It's not taking us into a better direction. We've got Hezbollah getting involved in the north. We've got an embassy in Damascus being targeted as well. This is getting overcomplicated. And at the same time, I'm afraid, you're actually inviting a new generation to actually join the ranks of Hamas because 2 million people are without the necessary aid and support that they actually deserve to have because they're caught up in what's going on here. That's a responsibility Israel needs to recognize.
Can I ask you about Alan Duncan's comments in the week? He's called for Tom Tugendhat, the security minister, to be sacked for his support of Israel, and Lord Eric Pickles and Lord Stuart Pollack to be kicked out of the House of Lords for, quotes, exercising the interests of another country. Shouldn't Alan Duncan be kicked out of the Conservative Party for these disgraceful comments?
I think that's probably a question for the Whip's office. I would say the fact that you're asking me that question, we've just had a very serious discussion about what we should do next in supporting Israel. Absolute right to go after Hamas, but its responsibility to look after the people of Gaza. The fact that we have Britons, politicians, then arguing with each other over this clearly is a distraction from what we should be doing in supporting an ally and supporting a region that we have a huge amount of relationship with.
Tobias, for time reasons, I need to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for your contribution this morning. Always great to speak to you. Lots more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, and Tony Blair's former advisor, John McTernan. You won't want to miss either of these interviews, so don't go anywhere.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. You're very vexed about these China cyber attacks. Colin says, what the hell is our Secret Service doing? They've only just realised what China's up to. You just couldn't make it up.
We could have told you.
We knew. We're not surprised. So Colin, we agree with you. Quite why it's taken GCHQ or MI6 or whoever it is, MI5, it'd be MI5 to know what's going on.
And Rod has said, thank you, Rod, if you know how you vote, if they know how you vote, coupled with mass data held also on you, do you not believe they can influence your decision-making process in any way? They won't know.
I'm not sure they know how you vote because
that's not on record anyway, is it?
It is not.
And Ken says these are only able to be carried out because of computers, internet, mobile phones, etc. It seems to me that these inventions are ruining our lives and therefore we were much safer and much happier without these inventions. There is a school of thought that would agree with that, Ken, very much so.
I sort of often think it myself, really.
Me too.
The dark web. I mean, how many people have been murdered because of the dark web?
You do wonder as well.
Brianna Jai.
Yeah, you do wonder. I look at my kids' generation and I wonder whether they will grow up and have a complete rejection of all of this and they will just say enough because they will think we were all insane for having become so addicted to our phones. I wonder whether, as a generation after generation do, they will reject it. Wayne, blame Western governments for the rise of China. People were saying this 10 years ago and every country ignored it. That is a really good point, Wayne, because we've taken Chinese investment and obviously our houses are full of items we bought from made in China.
And if you remember as well, we had to get them out of the 5G. Huawei.
We did.
Get them out, literally extricate them from
that was at least one thing I think they did quite well.
Yeah.
And Jan says if they've seen the electoral roll, what else have they been looking at? That's the threat to our democracy. They never do things by halves. I'm much more worried about my own government looking at what I do online, to be fair.
Go back, we said before, the electoral roll is a public document which you can access if you go to your library.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this morning. So much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by Rishi Sunak's right-hand man, the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden, and John McTernan, the former political secretary to Tony Blair. What will both men make of the latest polling predicting a Tory wipeout and a Labour landslide at the next general election? But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Camilla. It's 10 a.m. Our top stories this morning. Rishi Sunak says the government continues to stand by Israel's right to defend its security 6 months on from the October 7 terror attacks. Marking the occasion, the Prime Minister said the UK is shocked by the bloodshed and called for an immediate humanitarian pause in fighting. He also urged Hamas to release its hostages and implored Israel to ensure that aid gets into Gaza more swiftly. Well, meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has used the occasion to stress that the UK's support for Israel is not unconditional. Writing in the Sunday Times, Lord Cameron said there is no doubt where the blame lies over the death of 3 British aid workers and added that this must never happen again. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby died in airstrikes carried out by the IDF on an aid convoy on April 1st. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, told Camilla Tominey that the UK would be obliged to stop arms sales to Israel if it was found that they had broken international law.
I absolutely support Israel's right to prosecute and to go after Hamas after what they did. But I also disagree with Israel's military response, which seems to be without clarity of what its strategy is. What's the governance structure that it's working towards? What is going to be the post-security environment that it's building? What we're seeing is actually in information, we're seeing this conflict spread beyond the Middle East because of what's going on, because of what Israel is doing. That is why David Cameron is saying there needs to be conditions on what's going on.
Well, the government says it will deploy a Royal Navy ship to get more aid into Gaza. The vessel, which is not being named for security reasons, will deliver vital supplies. It's part of an international effort to establish a new humanitarian maritime corridor in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Foreign Office has announced a £9.7 million package for aid deliveries, logistical expertise and equipment support. Well, 2 former UK defence ministers say the UK has failed to prepare for war in a whole-nation endeavour. Outgoing Armed Forces Minister James Heappey revealed in The Telegraph that only Ministry of Defence officials attended a wartime preparation exercise, which was meant for the whole of government. He's now calling on ministers to do more to prepare. Former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace agrees, saying that too many in government are, quote, just hoping everything will go away. Police are hunting for a suspect after a woman was stabbed to death in broad daylight in Bradford. West Yorkshire Police were called to the city centre on Saturday afternoon following reports of an attack by a man who then fled the scene. The woman was taken to hospital where she later died. The force say that she is yet to be formally identified but is understood to be 27 years old. Her family have been informed and are being supported by specialist officers. Well, Scotland remains at risk of power cuts and travel disruption as Storm Kathleen continues to bring strong gusts and heavy rain. 43 flood warnings are currently in place, and the Met Office has issued a new yellow wind warning affecting the East and Northern Highlands, the Isle of Skye and the Hebrides. Yesterday, winds reached 73 miles per hour in Drumalbin, South Lanarkshire. The Scottish Environmental Protection Agency says there is real danger to life around causeways, coastal roads and paths. Meanwhile, meteorologist John Ketley told us it's still causing problems.
Yes, Storm Kathleen is certainly creating a few problems in the northwest of the country in particular, but it's blowing everywhere. And it's still blowing pretty strongly this morning as well. I'm sure there are a few trampolines being blown over, a few garden fences coming down as well. Kathleen is only just to the northwest of the Hebrides. It's just easing slightly, but it's still gusting over 60 miles an hour in parts of the northwest this morning.
And finally, almost 5 million people have reported dental problems to the NHS 111 helpline over the last 5 years. Government data analysed by the Labour Party revealed that around 965,000 people were referred for treatment in the last 12 months alone. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting said calls are skyrocketing, with people having to turn to private dentists or even carry out their own treatment. Health Minister Dame Andrea Leadsom says the government's dentistry recovery plan will make services faster.
There are lots of dentists who are burning out, who aren't able to stay in the profession because they're having to see 30, 50 patients a day to diagnose, treat, get them out of pain, all this sort of thing on a routine basis every single day. That can't be sustainable for anyone. And then we have an issue of the lack of new dentists coming in and the time frame being such a long time frame from getting someone qualified. So it's becoming more of an issue.
Was dentist Dr. Sam Jeffworth there giving his views. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Camilla.
Thanks, Ray. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by Oliver Dowden. Where does the Deputy Prime Minister stand on Britain selling arms to Israel? I'll also be speaking to the former Political Secretary to Tony Blair, John McTernan. Just how involved is Blair in Starmer's path to power? The feminist author and journalist Junie Bindel will be joining us. Should J.K. Rowling be arrested for speaking out against the new Scottish hate crime laws? And I'll be joined later by the author Alexander Larman to discuss his new book on the royal family. Is the monarchy in crisis following the King and Kate's cancer diagnoses? Well, first of all, though, let's go to Oliver Dowden now, who joins me. I hope you can hear me, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much for your time this morning. You'll probably have seen your colleague James Heapy's opinion piece in the Sunday Telegraph this morning. He's warning that the UK is failing to prepare for war. He says that Ben Wallace, when he was Defence Secretary, tried to carry out a government-wide exercise in departments going down and working from their bunkers to see what would happen in a worst-case scenario. Why didn't the whole of government attend that exercise? In the end, it was only left to defence ministers.
Well, I don't know the specific incident that James was referring to. It is the case that we carry out wide-scale exercising programmes across government. Indeed, I did one recently for a national power outage involving several thousand different people across government, and I'll shortly be publishing the next, what we call national exercising programme for precisely these kind of exercises, preparing across a range of risks. So it is the case that the government does undertake these exercises. Indeed, I undertook one in respect of a potential terrorist incident just a few weeks ago, which ministers attended as well. But I'm afraid I don't know the exact details of the incident to which Ben Wallace and others are referring.
But it's very worrying, isn't it, for the former Veterans Minister, somebody who's worked in the Ministry of Defence, to be saying that Britain is under-defended?
Well, I don't accept that characterisation. It is certainly the case.
So James Heapy's wrong. He worked in that department.
Over the past few months and years, we have seen the risk landscape affecting the United Kingdom increasing considerably. It's certainly the worst since it's been since the Second World War. Since the Cold War, possibly since the Second World War. This is taking across a range of different issues, whether it's cyber, whether it's economic security, or whether it's conventional security, as we see in Russia, Ukraine. There are greater challenges, but we are increasing our resources to address that. For example, we set up the National Cyber Security Centre to address cyber threats. I now chair the National Security Council on Economic Security, and I take literally dozens of decisions every day on economic security to defend investments into this country from threats from hostile states and from others. And we have been at the forefront of supporting our efforts in Russia, Ukraine, supporting our Ukrainian allies.
So is James Heapy wrong?
Of course, there's more we need to do against this backdrop.
This is a former defence minister who served himself in war zones. He's a former soldier, hugely respected former veterans minister, saying this. Are you saying that James Heapy's wrong?
I don't accept the full extent of his characterisation. I looked briefly at his
So he's almost a little bit right and a little bit wrong.
Camilla, you keep talking across me, trying to turn this into a simplistic binary black and white. This is not simplistic binary black and white. We see a range of at least 4 hostile states working across a range of different medians, often in grey zone conflicts. Now, of course, there is more work that we need to do across different areas, but we have stepped up considerably our effort. I believe that we are prepared, but there is more that we need to do because this threat landscape is increasing all of the time.
OK, may I pose a very, very straightforward question, which David Cameron so far doesn't seem to have answered as Foreign Secretary, but maybe you can as Deputy Prime Minister. Should we stop arms sales to Israel?
No. Of course, we have to periodically review it. We're required by law to do that, as we do with all our allies, including the United States. But the Business Secretary makes decisions on that based on advice she receives from the Foreign Secretary, and that advice has not changed. OK. Another hopefully straightforward question. Is there a sense to which you think Israel under Netanyahu has gone too far in its retaliation against the October the 7th attacks? Well, it's really important to reflect. This is 6 months since those attacks. And I think it's very easy for us to think that that's ancient history. Right now, in Israel, they're a nation in trauma. It's affecting the Jewish community in this country and indeed the wider world. We should never forget the fact that Hamas conducted that appalling atrocity and have said they would do the same thing over again. It is fully legitimate for Israel to fight Hamas and stop that threat against an enemy that hides itself amongst the population. It's a difficult war to prosecute. Now, of course, Israel isn't perfect. No nation is perfect. And we were very angered by the death of those aid workers. We think more aid should be getting into Israel. But the way we address that is by engaging with Israel, and there have been welcome steps in respect of both of those issues. Interestingly, Tobias Ellwood was on earlier with me. I don't know if you heard that interview because I think you were doing others, Mr. Dowden, but he was saying that if it was found that Israel was in breach of humanitarian and international law, that we should stop arms sale to Israel. Do you agree with that? Well, we have a process that we're obliged to go through. It's set out in legislation in respect of arms sales. We have some of the toughest arms sales controls in the world. And whether we're exporting to the US, to France, to any conventional allies, we do exactly the same thing. It's right that we keep that under review, and we're required to do so. But as I set out to you, the Foreign Secretary hasn't changed his advice, and therefore there's no reason for those arms exports not to continue. Do you think that Sir Alan Duncan should be removed from the Conservative Party, expelled from the party for suggesting that Tom Tugendhat, the Security Minister, should be sacked for his support of Israel, and that Eric Pickles and Stuart Polak should be kicked out of the House of Lords? Well, I believe he also made reference to me and to Michael Gove about our support for Israel as well. I'm afraid, look, I've known Alan for many years. These comments don't surprise me. I think he's totally wrong. And I think actually what he said about Stuart Pollock and Lord Pollock and Lord Pickles was offensive. I believe that CCHQ are investigating it, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Why do you say that these comments by Alan Duncan don't surprise you?
Well, because he's made similar comments for over many, many years. He's been.
Why is he still in the party then?
Vigorous in his criticism of Israel. Well, look, the Conservative Party has always been a very broad church, but as you know, there's this investigation going on in relation to Alan Duncan, and let's see what the outcome of that is.
On that note, with regard to some of your Conservative colleagues, is it right that William Ragg continues as Vice-Chairman of the 1922, having given his own colleagues' personal telephone numbers to what appears to be some kind of honeytrap scam artist?
The actions of William Ragg, or Will Ragg, were foolish and they were wrong, and he's apologised for it, and it's been brought out into the public domain. No, I don't think he should step down. I think he made a stupid error.
But he's betrayed backbenchers, hasn't he? He's betrayed backbenchers, and yet he claims to represent them as Vice-Chairman of the 1922 committee. Doesn't make any sense to keep him in that role, does it?
Well, as you and many of your viewers will know, the purpose of the 1922 committee is a committee of backbenchers, part of whose job really is to hold ministers to account. So I don't think it's going to be helpful for a minister to start telling the 22 committee how it should conduct its internal affairs. I've noted the fact that Will has accepted what he said was foolish, and he's apologised for it.
Is it foolish in general for MPs to be on dating apps, Mr. Dowden?
Well, it's actually quite an interesting question, Camilla. I'm happily married, so this isn't an issue that arises for me. But MPs are also entitled to have a private life and to conduct their private life. You shouldn't be forced to give up your private life in its entirety. I do think, though, it's incumbent on anyone who holds public office, whether nationally or locally, to hold themselves to a very high standard and think about the way in which they conduct themselves on those kind of sites. And Will Ragg clearly fell short of that in his conduct recently.
Now, according to Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times, insiders say Rishi Sunak is miserable, facing the prospect of electoral defeat, and there's already talk of what he does next, possibly in Silicon Valley. So is the Prime Minister miserable? You're his right-hand man, Mr. Dowden. What's his mood like at the moment with projections of a landslide Labour victory?
Well, first of all, he's not miserable. He's full of energy and vigour. I haven't had a single conversation with him around the lines of what Tim Shipman has described. Of course, the polls are difficult. My focus and his focus is on these elections coming up. I'm broadcasting here from the centre of London. If your viewers are fed up with Sadiq Khan's war on motorists, the ULEZ zone, the 20-mile-an-hour zones cropping up everywhere, the fact that you used to be able to drive at 40 miles an hour down Park Lane with 3 lanes, now it's down to 1, a bus lane, it's 20
All right,
miles.
this isn't a party political broadcast, Mr. Dowden.
Candidates, well, you raise political issues. I think that's the political context.
Well, speaking about the May elections...
Likewise, by the way, in Birmingham, where they're spending £1.8 million on trade union reps when they're going bankrupt.
Although the Midlands Mayor, Andy Street, looks like he might be in jeopardy, as might be Ben Houchen. So these May elections, if they don't go very well for the Conservatives, as predicted, Rishi Sunak's going to be facing more letters of no confidence, isn't he?
Well, I have no idea what is going to happen in the elections, because that's up to the people of who vote in them. I'm confident that we've got strong candidates and that they will succeed and win. You mentioned Andy Street, a brilliant candidate that's got so much investment into to Birmingham and the broader
So these
West
elections
Midlands.
won't be the bloodbath that's been predicted,
I've been up with Ben Houchen in Teesside, seen what he has done to transform that area. That is Conservative candidates in action. I'd urge all of your viewers to vote for those Conservative candidates.
We're getting into party
as a political
broadcast territory again.
not to be a commentator.
All right. Well, Oliver Dowden, thank you very much indeed
I'll
for your time this morning. Yeah, no, thank you. But thank you for your good humour as ever. Nice to see you. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by former political secretary to Tony Blair, John McTernan, find out what he makes of Oliver Dowden's comments there. Will May the 2nd not be a bloodbath? Let's wait and see. Also, how involved is Tony Blair in Starmer's path to power? Stay tuned for that.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Is it OK to call people fat? I won't call Bev fat because she isn't. She won't call me fat because I'm not. But the fitness fanatic, Derek Evans, you might know him better as 90s icon Mr Motivator, recently told a podcast diabetes have gone through the roof. You should be able to call people fat.
Well, he joins us now. Good morning, Derek. Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. So I think what you're getting at is this idea that we've become so polite about weight that we're ignoring the elephant in the room. If you'll forgive the phraseology there, and actually sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind.
Well, actually, you know, this has been taken out of all context. I actually didn't say you're entitled to call people fat. What I did say is that in the 80s and 90s, I remember the way I got into television, there was a gentleman walking at reception while I was waiting for the people I was training. And for some reason, I got up and I prodded him in the belly. And I said to him, you need to deal with that. That was fat. We have a nation where obesity, diabetes is killing every one of us. And unless we take responsibility for our health, rather than waiting for government to do this, government to do that, it is our responsibility, right, to look after our independence and our health. And as we get older, it's even more critical, right? And that's why I'm here as an example saying to you, listen, I'm 71 years of age and movement is medicine. And you can't sit around watching television and not going out to the gym or wherever. You will never, ever be able to look after your family and everything you've worked for. You will lose it. I've never seen a deposit account behind a hearse. No matter what you work for, the most important thing you can do with your life is every hour, do something active. Every hour.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by John McTernan, Tony Blair's former political secretary. John, thank you for joining me this morning. With Storm Kathleen raging across half of the country, I'm wondering if there's a storm brewing in the Labour Party, John, because we've got yet another report on the front page of the Mail on Sunday this morning about Angela Rayner's second home. The political editor there, Glenn Owen, claims to have got evidence that she did have this second home and that she was, in fact, living with her husband when she says that she wasn't. So this storm continues, doesn't it, to engulf the Deputy Prime Minister, or the wannabe Deputy Prime Minister, I should say. Do you think that actually Angela Rayner is becoming a bit too much of a hindrance rather than a help to Keir Starmer?
No. And the thing is, absolutely not. She's an absolute asset to Keir. She's part of the reason why Labour are leading in the polls at the moment. She's got charisma, she's got the common touch, she is a great campaigner. And the story is a concocted confection, and it's aimed at trying to destabilise one of Labour's greatest campaigners. It's laughable.
Hang on.
The obsession of one newspaper with this story is laughable because nobody can actually sum up in a sentence what the scandal is actually meant to be.
Well, I'll sum it up in a sentence, as far as I can understand it, John, is that she claims to have been living in a home that she wasn't living in, and therefore she may have a capital gains tax implication from selling what was a second home and not a primary home. So the allegation is that she's lied and she's claimed that her second home was her primary home. That's the allegation.
No.
It's really clear. You say no other newspapers have covered the story. Everyone's followed up on the Mail on Sunday. She's got questions to answer. If it were the Conservatives, you'd be attacking them for it.
You just completely answer them. And the problem you've got, the problem you've got in that explanation is you showed why it's not a story. Because the tax definition of a primary residence is a technical issue. And that is all that matters. People can't distinguish between and the Mail on Sunday is refusing to distinguish between what the tax law says about primary residence. And that's it. And the reason.
But isn't there a moral question for her to answer if she's saying that her primary residence was in fact her secondary residence and that she was actually living with her husband? Why is she not coming clean about that, John?
We know the tax situation is simple. Your primary residence is the residence that you designate as your primary residence. That's in the tax law. It's clear. That was her accountant's advice to her. And the argument that the Mail on Sunday have is presumably with HMRC and the way they allow you to define a house, a home, a building that you own as your primary residence. It's nothing to do with the way you live. It's actually a designation. And that's a simple, straightforward matter. It's a tax matter. Tax is complicated. Nobody thinks Angela Rayner's done anything wrong. And the way you've drifted off into saying, oh, it's a moral issue. It's not a moral issue. It's a case of one right-wing newspaper trying to harass Labour's greatest campaign.
OK, Labour's greatest campaigner. So you think that she should remain, should Keir Starmer become Prime Minister, she should remain as deputy? All right,
not just deputy Prime Minister. She should be in charge of whatever we're going to call the Department of Tackling Regional Inequality, in charge of housing, in charge of local government, in charge of planning reform, in charge of getting the economy going again, in charge basically of rebuilding Britain. I think I can think of no better person to do that than Angela.
I was really interested in a piece you've written for The Spectator talking about how difficult it might be for Starmer to manage a massive majority. You're saying managing 450 MPs is a tall order for any party leader. And you've also pointed out that there is still a sort of hard left cabal within the Labour Party. You talk about there being 35 members of the Socialist Campaign Group. So, first of all, do you think it is going to be difficult for him to manage a large majority?
I think a large majority gives you two things. It gives you a mandate and the ability to push through any legislation you want. And the truth is, the government have taken such power to themselves under the repatriation of European Union law that ministers don't need to even go to the House of Commons to change most law. And I expect that to happen under a Labour government. But with 450, you can get through what you want. The issue is managing them. And the point I want to make is they will have different interests. This will be a markedly younger Labour Party than at any time. The last time they had a big landslide, a big change in 1945, a lot of the members who came in had been in the army. I mean, Dennis Healy, people have been experienced in the army. We're going to have young people, a lot of whom will be renters, young people who, a lot of the future MPs, I expect over 100 MPs, to be Londoners in a sense, having been London politicians, living in London, living in the southeast. That will change the dynamics. The other big block is Angela Rayner's block, the Northwest. So she'll be strengthened by the 75 MPs in the Northwest, around 100, I reckon, London, the Southeast. These are the big blocks that Labour's going to have. Now, you have to respond to their interests. You also need to give them something to do, because there's only 150, 160 jobs the government ever gives out as ministers, as PPSs, as whips. So giving people something to do is going to be really important.
But also, isn't the parliamentary party inherently going to be more left-wing than, say, Blair's administration and his parliamentary party? Peter Hitchens has written today, Starmer's Labour is not moderate or safe. I mean, you have to admit that Starmer is more left-wing than Tony Blair ever was, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I embrace that fact. Keir Starmer's not a Blairite. Keir Starmer is from the soft left of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer is closer in his personal politics to Ed Miliband than he is to Gordon Brown. And I think that's, that's to be welcome, because our modern era, the 21st century, Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister in the second quarter of the 21st century, not in the 20th century. Big demands, big different demands. I think we do require a lefter, more red, more greener, a red-green government rather than a Blairite government. That's what we need.
And how much influence do you think Blair is actually having behind the scenes? Because we know some of the policies that the Institute comes up with, Tony Blair's Institute, then ended up kind of filtering into Labour policy. We know, obviously, that Lord Mandelson is quite close to Starmer. How close is Blair to Starmer, John?
Very close. Anybody who saw them on stage last summer at Tony's, the Institute's annual conference, you saw chemistry. You saw that this wasn't the first time they've been speaking to each other. They speak to each other a lot, as far as I can gather, in the way they react to each other. And look, Peter is always going to be an influential political figure in the Labour Party because he's a great political strategist. So is Tony. And you'd have to be a crazy Labour Party leader in the modern day to ignore the advice, the counsel, the wisdom of Peter and Tony. But Keir's his own man. He's changed the Labour Party himself. It wasn't anything to do with any Blairites, the way that Keir took the Labour Party back from the hard left, the way that he's taken us from our worst election defeats in the 30s to being on the verge of a landslide bigger than Tony's landslide. So look, there's a lot of people ask where do Keir's ideas come from, mainly from him. But does he take good ideas if Tony Blair comes up with them? Of course he does. He takes good ideas if Anthony Albanese in Australia comes up with them, or if Joe Biden comes up with them in America. If there are good ideas in politics, you should take them rather than ignore them because of who they come from.
I mean, that's good while Biden is still US president. He might struggle to get on with Donald Trump, though, mightn't he, John, very briefly?
Yeah, Biden's going to be the president. Trump is going to lose on the abortion issue. Abortion will trump every other issue in this election.
OK. John McTernan, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the feminist Julie Bindel to find out just how damaging Scotland's new hate crime law is for free speech, particularly for those who believe men are men and women are women. Now, earlier, I mentioned the West Midlands mayoral contest, and here are the candidates for that election. I just have to name them all in accordance with Ofcom rules. Siobhan Harper, Noons, who's the Greens. Richard Parker is for Labour and the Cooperative Party. Andy Street is the Conservative candidate. Sunny Verk is the Liberal Democrat. And Elaine Ruth Williams is for Reform. And there's also a list of candidates that are available for the Tees Valley mayoral election. Ben Houchen's fighting it for the Conservatives. Chris McEwen for Labour. Simon Thorley for the Liberal Democrats. So there you have it. I'll be back next with Julie Bindel. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Are our relationships with foreign countries actually undermining free speech on a day-to-day basis in our universities?
Well, it's very good to be with you. It's difficult to form a kind of clear conclusion because, as we know, universities are much, much more reliant on international fees than they used to be. We are seeing some sort of troubling developments, particularly at the level of admissions criteria. We're seeing quite stark and frankly scandalous disparities in the admissions criteria for domestic students as against foreign students in some universities. And so part of the problem is that the financial incentive structures are such that universities risk becoming more and more dependent upon foreign regimes because they're simply bringing in an awful lot more money.
James, of course, all of this discussion, we say countries. Frankly, mainly we're really looking at one country, aren't we? China.
Well, China is certainly a focus. I mean, nearly 1 in 3 undergraduate students from overseas at Russell Group universities were from China in 2021. 60% of overseas postgraduates come from China. We know from the FBI and the Five Eyes security chiefs that China is a master at intellectual property theft. And of course, there's a whole range of human rights issue concerns over Taiwan, Tibet, Uyghur Muslims, lockdown tyranny. I mean, all of these are issues about which, researchers and academics should be free to teach. and question, and in universities where there is a heavy commercial reliance on regimes like China, there are obvious disincentives to ensuring that academics and students are free to speak their mind on those issues.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Morning and welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm joined now by feminist author and journalist Julie Bindel. Julie, you were going to be in the studio with me, but I understand you've been caught up in Storm Kathleen. So I hope you're safe, dry and well.
I am, Camilla, thank you.
Good stuff. Let's speak about this astonishing report in The Telegraph in the week, which revealed an analysis of more than 600 schools, basically showing that teachers there were affirming children's chosen gender behind their parents' back. Now, this is obviously in contravention of this draft guidance that's been produced by the government, which basically states that parents have a right to know if their children are trying to change gender in schools. Does this suggest that this guidance just isn't worth the paper it's written on, Julie?
Well, it's quite incredible the way that some, some trans activists and those deeply embedded within this absolutely crazy ideology will flout laws, will flout guidance and rules, as we saw with the Maya Forstater case, with the Professor Joe Phoenix case, with other cases where there's been clear discrimination against women and men who have defied this ideology and dared to speak out about it, probably knowing, or at least being legally advised, that if they go ahead and hound these women out of their jobs, they will be in a tribunal and they will likely lose. And I think it's the same with some teachers, that they have decided that they are on the right side of history, that they are the ones that are being kind, being responsible with these children. They honestly believe the flat earth theory that children have a gender identity, and therefore their arrogance just supersedes any kind of guidance or rules within the school, and it has to stop.
Yes, I mean, this study was about schools down in Devon and Cornwall, because those areas of the UK, I think, have the highest levels of sort of children claiming that they're a different gender. However, anecdotally, I mean, I've heard evidence. I remember speaking on a panel with representatives from Sex Matters and the Bayswater Group and others, saying that there are a great many parents across the UK who are being kept in the dark about what their children are saying and how they're identifying in school. There's an example in The Telegraph of a woman from the West Country who only found out that her daughter had been allowed to change gender at school when the teachers called her he at a parents' evening. Are you hearing these sorts of stories, Julie?
All the time. And in fact, something that really struck me was finding out that the highest number of referrals to the GIDS gender clinic, the Tavistock, thankfully now closed, was from Blackpool. Now, Blackpool is one of the most socially deprived towns in the country. We're talking about the highest numbers of children in care who self-harm, who abuse drugs, and who have psychological and mental ill health, attempt suicide, you name it. Sexual abuse is off the scale towards children in that town. And yet swathes of girls and young women are presenting as trans men, trans boys. Now, why do we think that is? I think it might be that they want to escape the hell that they are in, and that social workers are doing a one-stop shop, easy. Well, yes, of course, you must be transgender. That must be why you're self-harming. That must be why you're estranged from your parents. That must be why you hate your body. So that's going on the one hand. On the other hand, I do hear stories from parents constantly that social transition in schools is commonplace as soon as the child demands that they should be affirmed by their new pronouns, and everyone has to buy into this fantasy that they're the opposite sex. Now, you may think, viewers might think, well, what's the harm? It's not like they're being put on puberty blockers. It's not like they're having surgery. But it is deeply harmful because this child adopts a fiction and is affirmed within that fiction, and it puts them in conflict with their parents. And of course, this leads them onto a path of believing that they are the opposite sex. So it's deeply harmful. And it's also deeply wrong and disrespectful to the parents to continue doing this when they've been told that they shouldn't.
Having said that, Julie, you know, there are children out there, and you'll be familiar with them, who say that they are suffering terribly from a mental health perspective of feeling that they're trapped in the wrong body, that they need to be listened to, that they don't want to live their lives as their own gender, that they would prefer to change gender. I can take your argument about puberty blockers, and I think, you know, there are some who argue that no child under 18 should even, contemplate the idea of taking puberty blockers or having surgery. But at the same time, what do you do for those children who do feel that they've been born into the wrong body?
Counselling and support. Obviously, it's a mental illness. To believe that you are trapped in the wrong body is not mentally healthy. We know that. We know that those people that have been diagnosed with body dysmorphia, that say that they want to lose a limb, and that if surgeons don't remove that limb, they'll lay across a railway line or they'll amputate themselves. And we saw that how back in 2003-4 in Scotland, there were 3 or 4 cases where psychiatrists did refer these people onto surgeons, and they did have healthy limbs removed. And rightly so, there was an absolute public outcry, and that practice was stopped. So what we do with children that say that they are deeply unhappy, hate their bodies, are trapped in the wrong body, is we treat it as a mental disorder, as mental ill health. Just as we do when somebody is suffering from very, very severe anorexia to the point of where they put their lives and their health in chronic danger. So we do not affirm it. We work with that young person to find out exactly why they feel that they are in the wrong body and why they hate their body so much. And then we deal with that problem.
Julie, you mentioned Scotland there. How dangerous do you think is this new hate crime law for freedom of speech, but particularly the freedom of speech of those who, like J.K. Rowling, are gender critical?
It's absolutely bonkers. You know, hate crime is deeply problematic anyway. We do have laws that deal with, for example, incitement to racial hatred, public order offences, threatening behaviour, harassment, common assault. We should be able to deal with any incidents of that nature with legislation that already exists. Developing something that tackles so-called hate, which isn't even a crime, is problematic on various levels. First of all, police can decide that you have committed this hate non-crime incident, and the next thing you know, your potential employer finds out about it because, of course, it would be on your DBS check. It would come up if you have been reported, sort of like having a caution. So it's a deep and serious infringement on our human rights and on our right to a private life. Secondly, the reasonable person test. So if a reasonable person thinks that, for example, J.K. Rowling, myself, whoever, who says, but that isn't a woman, that is a man. Well, where is the reason in Scotland deciding this issue when Nicola Sturgeon wanted a law that would have a male-bodied rapist in a women's prison who wanted to pass a law of self-identification so any man at any time, for any reason, could simply self-identify into the status of woman and be afforded legal rights and access to our single-sex spaces that we only set up because enough of a minority of men pose a threat to women and girls. Not all men, like not all trans people, but trans women are men. So if we want to keep women and girls safe, then we must have women-only spaces. But the other thing about the Scottish law is that how can a reasonable person test be applied to this when women are being told the most unreasonable and crazy thing imaginable, that we have to pretend that a man is a woman. And if that man decides he's a woman and is chosen to represent the country in an Olympic sport and pushes aside the hopes, the lifetime of training of an actual woman to do so, is that reasonable? Is it reasonable that we had to believe that Isla Bryson, the double rapist, is a woman? So it's none of this is reasonable. And I know that Rowling and others, including myself, have chosen to use preferred pronouns in certain circumstances about and towards trans people, depending on, as I say, the context. But her tweets were not hateful. She knew fine well what she was doing was pointing out the outrageous misogynistic behaviour of those people that she listed who were men. And it needs to be said.
OK. Julie Bindel, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I'd like to speak more with you. Perhaps you'll come back into the studio, because I think the issue of athletes at the Olympics as we fast prepare for the Games in Paris will be a very interesting topic of discussion. So thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, Julie Bindel. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be talking to my fellow GB News host, Michael Portillo, about what's coming up on his show at 11, and also the author, Alexander Lama, about his new book on the royal family. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Kathleen continues to bring some very strong winds and some blustery showers across the UK through today. Those showers always heaviest in the west and staying particularly windy in those western areas. Parts of northwestern Scotland could see gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour through the afternoon. Southeastern parts of England definitely holding on to the best of the sunshine, but it's across western parts of England and Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland too that those blustery showers continue. They could be quite heavy in places, causing some localised flooding, and it'll be another mild day, temperatures around 16 or 17 degrees, but those strong southwesterly winds taking the edge off those temperatures. Through Sunday evening, showers continue to push their way eastward, so turning a little drier across Wales, central and northern parts of England, and the showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland gradually ease through the early hours too. All eyes down towards the southwest though, cloud increases as another area of low pressure pushes into southwestern parts of the UK through Monday morning. Staying mild here, temperatures around 10 degrees, but a little cooler under the clear skies further north. So for Scotland and Northern Ireland, quite a bright start to the morning, but that doesn't last long. This area of low pressure pushes its way northwards across the UK through Monday morning. That rain turning particularly heavy across southwest England, Wales, and then into Northern Ireland through the afternoon. Southeast England still holding on to a bit of sunshine, and with some lighter winds here, it will be feeling a little more pleasant. Temperatures still well above average, around 16 or 17.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm joined now by Alexander Larman, the author of a new book, Power and Glory, the latest release in his trilogy series about the royal family. Alexander, lovely to see you this morning. We've got it flashed up there.
Wonderful.
Lovely book cover featuring the Queen with her father there, George VI. Wonderful. Let's talk about whether the monarchy is in crisis, because I know the book covers the abdication crisis and I suppose the aftermath of Princess Diana's death and all of the trials and tribulations that the royals have faced in living memory. But the monarchy today, the King diagnosed with cancer, the Princess of Wales diagnosed with cancer, is it a crisis?
Well, it's not a crisis in terms of the abdication crisis, which is obviously a constitutional crisis, but it's a personal and family crisis, which is extending out into how the monarchy is being perceived. Because one of the themes in my book is that George VI had cancer, and it was concealed from him and concealed from everybody else.
Let me just stop you on that. Concealed from him?
Yes.
What was he told?
Well, he was told that he had this illness, which was advanced bronchitis. And even though he had to have his lung removed,
yes,
he was still being told there was nothing seriously the matter with him.
And was it true to say that he was operated on within Buckingham Palace because they obviously didn't want news to get out that he was seriously ill?
Yes, there was a makeshift operating theatre constructed. And he's very stoic about it. I mean, he said that he didn't mind going under the surgeon's knife and things like that. But it's a remarkable idea, isn't it, that the king could be lied to by the surgeons around him because they were so fearful this news would come out. And you have to look at reputations and the way in which having a king with cancer would be seen as somehow shameful.
So it's interesting that now, all these decades on, that we've had such honesty from Buckingham Palace. Initially, before the cancer was diagnosed, we obviously had those words, enlarged prostate, in a Buckingham Palace missive, which I don't think we'd have seen before. Is it a good thing that the palace are being more transparent about these health conditions, or is it actually destabilising?
I think the palace has to be more honest because, I mean, you can look what happened with Kate, where when the whole truth wasn't being revealed, I mean, the speculation got so wild. People were coming forward with the most outrageous ideas, and these were being taken seriously in mainstream circles. And I think one thing is that we are obsessed by the health of the royal family because as the first family in this country, we looked for them to set an example, and the fact that at the moment 2 of the senior members have cancer is absolutely unprecedented. And we certainly haven't seen a situation like this in history.
Although it's interesting, isn't it, how the palace responds to social media trolling. I mean, I appreciate that obviously the young Princess Elizabeth and indeed Princess Margaret and George VI and the Queen Mother, when they were bringing up those daughters, they weren't having to live in this age of sort of 24-hour news and people publishing whatever they like with impunity on the internet. You then have to ask yourself the extent to which the palace responds to that, because there were some that might have said that the Princess of Wales even entertaining the idea of posing up for Mothering Sunday and releasing an image was just to answer critics that are never ever going to be satisfied, let's be honest. There's always going to be trolls on social media for whom there is no response that is the right response.
And they have carried on to this day. But I think one thing that's very interesting is if you look at the difference between the responses, Buckingham Palace came forward very quickly and gave a fairly candid idea of what's happening with Charles and what his illness is. Kensington Palace didn't. And I think that's because Prince William is much more into the vein of never complain, never explain, which was his grandmother's motto, his great-grandfather's motto, and has always served the royal family well. But it doesn't hold up in 2024 because you've got to allow the idea that information is going to get out into the public, whether you like it or not.
Yes. Well, sometimes the royals take ownership of their own information, don't they? I mean, we think back to the Megxit bombshell, Harry and Meghan announcing that on their own website. How damaging do you think Megxit has been for the royal family?
I don't think it's been particularly damaging at all, actually, because I think that Harry and Meghan, initially, there was all the controversy and the difficulty. But ever since Harry published his memoir, Spare, which was a ridiculous book, there's no sense whatsoever that they are a serious couple. I mean, I was looking at the American Riviera Orchard revelation the other day, and I thought...
Yeah, that's Meghan's new lifestyle brand.
And I thought Wallace Simpson, who's obviously Meghan's spiritual forebear, would have done her own lifestyle brand, but with quite so crass a title. No, I don't think so.
Do you think Harry and Meghan are a sort of latter-day Edward and Wallace?
I think they definitely are, yes. And you can see the haplessness that Edward had in Harry. You can also see the steely determination to make money in Meghan. So I think they're very lucky to find each other because they've made 2 people miserable rather than 4. And much the same thing can be said about the Duke and Duchess of Windsor.
I mean, I know that your book is looking back at living memory of the royals. What would you say has been, let's look at actually the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, sort of stalwart on the throne, a guiding presence. We think about her "We'll meet again" speech and other key moments, and obviously her reign was characterised by her never having really put a foot wrong. However, what do you think might have been one of the key mistakes she made, and what do you think is probably her greatest triumph of her reign?
Well, I think her greatest triumph was for sheer longevity, and as you say, she never put a serious foot wrong. There was never any discussion about her abdicating the throne. There was never any discussion about her causing any kind of harm to the institution of the royal family. I think the only misstep she ever made was how she handled Diana's death.
Yes.
Because I feel that, again, the never complain, never explain adage didn't work back in 1997. And you can see that it probably stopped working around the time she became queen, actually, because we live in an age of mass communication. We live in an age where people want to know the news instantly. And if you are this major institution which is blocking the news and blocking the output of news, you're going to end up in a situation where people are disappointed, and then they start to look for something else. And I think that being slow to realise what the changing world is has always been a problem with the royal family.
Although she kind of turned a mistake into one of her greatest triumphs, I thought, because when she did give the televised address, where she spoke not just as your queen but as a grandmother, she really managed to rescue what was looking like an increasingly difficult situation that week, to be fair to the late queen.
Oh, absolutely. And she turned it around magnificently. And one thing she was always so good at, and you just referenced her We'll Meet Again speech, is that she understood the mood of the nation. And I think that was partly because she had an excellent comms team around her, you know, really dedicated private secretaries. But it was also because, as somebody who was a veteran of the institution of monarchy, she'd seen every conceivable challenge that could have been levelled at her, and she overcame all of them. And she was a deeply remarkable woman.
On the King, it's interesting to see reports that he does look as if he wants to go ahead with a 2-week visit to Australia this October. That's despite him being nearly 76 by that point and undergoing cancer treatment. Is that a good idea, do you think? I mean, there's this sense, I think, that he needs to shore up the Commonwealth, which wasn't a discussion that necessarily took place on the late Queen's watch.
Well, I think it's a thing that kings always want to do, which is to announce this great foreign trip that's going to firm up their reign. I mean, George VI wanted to go to Australia as well, and he wasn't able to. And you go back further in history, and Henry IV was obsessed by going to Jerusalem. So I think there's always a sense that a king will say, I want to do this trip. But the Commonwealth is very much up in the air, isn't it? Because Prince William has publicly said that he believes the Commonwealth will probably come to an end during his reign. And obviously, we have no idea when that reign is going to begin, because we can say we think the Commonwealth is going to exist for another 10, 20, 30 years. But is it really?
OK, Alexander Larman, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Your book, Power and Glory, I think, is out now, if people would like to read it. Well, thank you very much to Alexander and to all of my guests today. I'll be back next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. as usual. But up next, it's Michael Portillo after the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. Storm Kathleen continues to bring some very strong winds and some blustery showers across the UK through today. Those showers always heaviest in the west and staying particularly windy in those western areas. Parts of northwestern Scotland could see gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour through the afternoon. Southeastern parts of England definitely holding on to the best of the sunshine, but it's across western parts of England and Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland too that those blustery showers continue. They could be quite heavy in places, causing some localised flooding, and it'll be another mild day, temperatures around 16 or 17 degrees, but those strong southwesterly winds taking the edge off those temperatures. Through Sunday evening, showers continue to push their way eastwards, so turning a little drier across Wales, central and northern parts of England, and the showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland gradually ease through the early hours too. All eyes down towards the southwest, though. Cloud increases as another area of low pressure pushes into southwestern parts of the UK through Monday morning. Staying mild here, temperatures around 10 degrees, but a little cooler under the clear skies further north. So for Scotland and Northern Ireland, quite a bright start to the morning, but that doesn't last long. This area of low pressure pushes its way northwards across the UK through Monday morning. That rain turning particularly heavy across southwest England, Wales, and then into Northern Ireland through the afternoon. Southeast England still holding on to a bit of sunshine, and with some lighter winds here, it will be feeling a little more pleasant. Temperatures still well above average, around 16 or 17.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be